good evening. Well, tonight I can reveal the major scandal enveloping at Nine involving the departure of one of its top executives and the lengths the network went to cover it up, including the use of non-disclosure agreements. Nine has been accused of covering up allegations that its legendary news guru, former Director of News and Current Affairs Darren Wick, behaved inappropriately towards women. In one incident, he behaved inappropriately to a television star after the Logies. In another, he refused to engage or respond to senior female staff who reported to him. His drunken behaviour raised so much concern at one Nine function that an employee is said to have called police when they witnessed Wick getting in his car to drive. The secrecy of Wick's departure has infuriated many employees, particularly women, with many aware of the nature of his alleged behaviour. There's internal revolt about the cover-up, with journalists worried that it exposes the company to accusations of hypocrisy. Wick formally left Nine on the 15th of March after being on leave in the weeks prior, while an external firm investigated a fresh complaint against him. He claimed he was leaving because of exhaustion after 4 decades working as a journalist. But the Australian confirmed today that his departure followed allegations of inappropriate behaviour towards a female staff member. And tonight, I can reveal further details about this complaint. I understand while the complaint was new, it related to an incident that occurred some years ago, considered historical. The allegation is understood to have been made from a current female employee in the Nine network in the television news division. I understand an external legal firm was brought in to conduct the investigation into the allegation against Wick. It didn't substantiate the allegation, yet the decision was made for him to leave at the highest levels, where this was seen as the final straw given previous concerns about his conduct. Now, I sought comment on all of this from Nine's Corporate Affairs today. Victoria Buchan, a friend of Wick's, said, and I quote, "not responding." Multiple sources today told me this complaint against Wick was seen as the final straw. In a separate incident, it became well known at Nine that there'd been an alleged incident of inappropriate behaviour by Wick towards a Channel 9 star at the Logies after party on the Gold Coast in 2019. There was no official complaint, and the woman has distanced herself from it, not wanting to be the subject of media scrutiny. The woman referred us to Nine's Corporate Affairs, who denied there'd been any complaint. But when questioned on how this had been handled, whether Wick had faced any formal repercussions, or whether the board, chaired by former Treasurer Peter Costello, or executive management had shown a duty of care to the female employee, Victoria Buchan said, "We do not discuss our processes on any instances of this kind publicly about anyone. These processes are always confidential, and it is important for all parties that they remain so. That is our policy." I made several attempts today to contact Wick for comment. I sent him questions. So far, he has not responded. Now, as well as these alleged incidents of inappropriate behaviour, there are also a number of instances where Wick allegedly deliberately ghosted senior employees, refusing to engage with them even though they reported to him. It's understood to be a tactic to keep female employees on edge and make them feel insecure in their jobs. But there was one transgression that was thrust into the public domain, which was when Wick pled guilty to high-range drink driving in January 2021.
The boss of Nine News has narrowly avoided doing jail time after pleading guilty to high-range drink driving. It's the second time Darren Wick's been convicted. This time, he was almost 5 times the legal limit.
But he won't do time behind bars. Instead, a 9 months intensive corrections order means the news boss is free to live a normal life in the community. He could be jailed if he puts a foot wrong.
Outside court, Wick was remorseful and apologised for his behaviour.
I'm in a position where I do know better, and I should have known better. I made a terrible mistake where I could have harmed others or harmed myself, which would have harmed my family and harmed my friends and colleagues. So I own it completely.
Wick had been driving home from a work function at 9 in October 2020 when he was stopped by police. The word inside 9 is that Wick was only caught because a concerned colleague phoned police, worried that he'd be a danger to others or himself behind a wheel after consuming so much alcohol. And when police breathalyzed him, he recorded a blood alcohol reading of more than 4 times over the legal limit. Wick held on to his job after this. Now, The Australian reported today that the Channel 9 board knew about the most recent complaint of inappropriate behaviour from a female staff member. Sophie Ellsworth and James Madden reported that it is also understood issues relating to Wick did go to Nine's Human Resources Department, and parties have signed non-disclosure agreements pertaining to the matter. So the board, led by former Treasurer Peter Costello and Chief Executive Mike Sneesby, knew about the allegation of inappropriate behaviour, and presumably they also knew about the non-disclosure agreements. I put in calls to Costello today, but haven't heard back. Yet despite the board discussing the complaint, Wick was given a warm send-off, and there was no public mention of any complaint against him. Nine's Director of Television, Michael Healy, praised Wick's enormous impact at Nine, including his recent work heading up the news division at a time of transformation. He wished him well and thanked him for his commitment to the news brand. Now, there is a broad sentiment from everyone at Nine I've spoken to that there should have been transparency over Wick's departure. There's a strong view that Nine journalists can't investigate, pursue and attack others, whether it's politicians, media companies or big corporations, over internal scandals and inappropriate conduct when it covers up its own problems. And multiple Nine sources have accused their own company of covering up this scandal. They say there shouldn't be a veil of secrecy over allegations of inappropriate behaviour. One source said to me, "There's been an extraordinary degree of secrecy around it. The key thing that people are annoyed about is the fanfare of his departure versus what happened." In fact, at precisely the same time the Spotlight scandal was unfolding at Channel 7, Nine, the publisher of the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Fin Review, didn't say a peep about why Wick had left the company. Here was Nine pursuing Seven and its executives.
Auerbach's role at Seven's Spotlight program in June last year was to help the show's executive producer, Mark Llewellyn, lock in Lorriman for an exclusive interview deal with the network.
Tailor-made package, apparently no expense spared, checkbook journalism laid bare in a hotbed of allegations aired before the federal court. Channel 7 racking up eye-watering expenses to nail down their prized scoop.
The Sydney Morning Herald has published stories about Alan Jones, Craig McLaughlin and Channel 7 Spotlight. And I do understand that investigative journalist Kate McClymont has been chasing the story about what unfolded with Darren Wick. I also put to Nine's corporate affairs today the hypocrisy of Nine's journalism arm reporting on similar topics and allegations in the world of politics and rival media organisations, yet covering up a scandal within their own organisation. Victoria Buchan said, "Nothing has been swept under the carpet or covered up." Well, Nine's cover-up of this scandal at the very top of its news division is laughable, given the ferocity with which it pursued their commercial rival at Seven. Across its media outlets, Nine does much to support women editorially and at a corporate level. But perhaps they could focus more closely on issues affecting some female employees within their own company. Now, also on the show tonight, Melbourne University threatens to call in the police and expel pro-Palestinian students who are occupying buildings on campus. It comes after a weekend of unrest on the city's streets as protesters clash with police. Also ahead, new data dropping tonight revealing Labor's failure to improve Australia's unemployment problem, with 1 million people still claiming welfare benefits. And Iran's president, known as the Butcher of Tehran, confirmed dead in a helicopter clash, along with the foreign minister. We'll talk about what this could mean for the Middle East. But now let's have a look at federal politics. And Anthony Albanese is joining a growing chorus of politicians, both federal and state, who want to see enforceable age limits on social media. Have a look.
Parents are worried sick about what their kids have access to online. It is a major social issue in this country. We want to respond positively to the request from parents that we do something about this. We want to make sure that any measures that are put in place are effective, because one of the concerns which is there is that age protocols may be circumvented by users.
Okay, let's bring in Sky News host Liz Storer and contributor Joe Hildebrand. Joe, in a sense, wouldn't this be a relief to parents that they don't have to say to their kids, you're banned from TikTok? In their young teenage years, they can say, well, the government's banning this.
That's right. This is an absolute godsend. Good on the PM for doing this. Chris Minns also came out very early, the Premier of New South Wales, and said, yep, I'm all on board. I cannot punch a hole in it. I cannot see, I've been saying for years now, I cannot see pretty much any benefit from social media, certainly no benefit which outweighs the downside to it. It's been an absolute force for destruction right across the globe, particularly in the West, and I think it has really harmed politics, and I think it has harmed public life. The difference
We're not talking about bad
no. But I was about to say, the difference is that adults, what I'm saying is that I've seen it do harm to adults who have got hides as tough as rhinoceroses. Just imagine the harm that it is doing. We don't have to. We've seen the suicides. We've seen the bullying. We've seen, that's right. And again, all sorts of things, even just kids, that's the extreme end, obviously, and that's horrendous enough. But, kids being addicted to it, dragged into it by the algorithm, it rewarding the focus, it rewarding extreme behaviour and just dragging kids in so that they're zombies, distracting them when they're at school. We know that it reduces cognitive function when kids are at school, let alone when they're at home. This is no place for children. It's no place for adults, and it's definitely no place for
One of the stories as a journalist that will never leave me is interviewing the parents of a 10-year-old who took her own life after she was cyberbullied so badly. And of course, bullying is terrible in the playground, but the cyberbullying, it follows the children into their bedrooms. The parents don't know what's going on. Liz, it only makes sense to have an enforceable ban here, raising the age limit to 16.
I can't imagine any rational person disagreeing. My biggest question is what took so long? We have had such comprehensive data for so long that has been screaming at us worldwide that the effect of social media on children is massively detrimental, socially, mentally, you name it. It is no good. So why now, better late than never, but why now is the government suddenly taking measures? And I've said it before, my only question mark here is how on earth you can enforce such a ban without really railroading absolutely everybody else's rights. We heard the Morrison government talk in late 2021.
So are you for this or against this?
No, like I said, no rational person would oppose a ban of children accessing social media, especially if they visited any amount of the study that's been done. But in order to enforce such a ban, we are unquestionably looking at what it will require, and that is going to mean quite a few rights, matters of privacy for adults, because everyone is going to have to prove that they are who they say they are in order to jump online, in order to prove I am not a child, I am old enough to access
You know
this.
what? I wouldn't need to show them my ID. I'd just have to show them my wrinkles up close.
But even then, you could be lying.
Is that not a good thing? Like, if people are going to go and behave like monsters online, should they not at least not be accountable for that? I mean, that's what free speech is. Free speech is not the ability to be able to go and anonymously bully someone to death or troll someone you don't like without having
No, but
any
as I've discussed before, there is a lot of people online who aren't bullies, who aren't trolls, and have chosen to remain anonymous because they know speaking their truth these days, usually conservative beliefs, they will cop it in their public life,
but that's a small
in
price
their
to
private
pay, isn't
life.
it, for everyone else's safety? And it does remove anonymous trolls as well.
It does, but again, these things are always done in the name of safety, and often at the time we cannot see the effects of down the road and what it will mean for people who then no longer have the right to remain anonymous.
All right, let's have a look at this next topic. Labor's travel expenses once again in the spotlight after revelations in the Oz today that taxpayers will fund $450 million for 2 new Boeing 737s to fly the PM, well, his dog Toto, and the government around. Joe, look. This is an
Come on, Joe. How are you going to defend this?
It's not a great look in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
And after a budget that everyone's agreed doesn't actually relieve that crisis.
But it can't, because it can't be inflationary. But again, this is something the PM and the government and the Governor-General, who are all these dignitaries who are sharing these 2 jets. I think we all agree that they do need jets to be able to get around.
They've got
don't do
jets.
normal
Why
jets.
luxury
The jets
jets?
are 20 years old.
Why luxury jets?
The jets are 20 years old. They're at the end of their life, and the government had a choice by either leasing 2 jets for 12 years or buying them outright, and it found out that buying them outright was actually cheaper. So it was actually cheaper to buy these 2 jets. The government actually saved $100 million and actually bought the jets.
Luxury jets. Luxury jets.
And
you know what,
instead of actually leasing them.
They need it. It's basically as essential as bread. These jets, they can't live without them.
Well,
The question mark is the luxury. Nobody is how dare they get around. Although, if they want to practice what they preach, they should all be on bicycles or some sort of emissions-free bus, because they expect everyday people to pay dearly, and we all are, for the green dream that they're foisting onto everyone, while they spend almost $500 million of our money to buy 2 luxury jets that will spew out emissions for decades to come. Do me a favour.
Don't you wish they would also have to catch Qantas or Virgin flights or Jetstar and see how many cancellations there are?
Right,
and maybe they then fix up.
Fly Bonza. Oh, that's right.
That would make them politicians of the people.
Yeah.
All right, unions are pushing for Labor's controversial right to disconnect laws. Remember, these are the laws that give employees the right to disconnect, not to answer their boss's phone once they've got home at night. Well, the Oz reporting that the ACTU wants Fair Work to rule out bosses being disorganised as a reasonable excuse to contact workers after hours to perform unpaid work. Joe, is this fair enough?
Well, I think the example that Michelle O'Neill, the ACTU president, gave was, I thought, a pretty reasonable one, which is the boss can't, realise suddenly that there's something they were meant to do during the week and they've totally forgotten, and call an employee at 4:50 on a Friday and say, right, you've got to spend your weekend doing this. Having said that, the number of times I've had editors ask, say, oh my God, we forgot to stuff this up. Can you fix this? Blah, blah.
And you said, well, the work to disconnect.
And that's right. And of course I say yes, but I guess I'm not. And we are not. I mean, the sort of workers that unions represent are not necessarily the higher end kind of white collar workers, where you are expected to do whatever it takes and you're usually remunerated and rewarded accordingly. These are workers who might be, say, for example, teachers who don't want to have to respond to every single email they get from a cranky parent until 9 o'clock at night, which frankly I can assure you they do anyway. So I think it's more about just saying employees have the right to say no, to change the kind of expectation. But again, I think there'll be a lot of workers sort of at our end and our industries and professionals who would say, well, what are you talking about? And I think also if you're asking to work from home, then the right to disconnect suddenly becomes a very serious
Liz, I feel like the younger generation don't even need these laws, because try getting hold of anyone under 30 after hours and they're not picking up their phone.
Oh, exactly. They're well aware of their rights and they are laying down the law, which is why a lot of employers do not want to hire them, because very different work ethic in the younger generations. But I just think this is getting absolutely ridiculous because, of course, it's so subjective. I mean, what you might class as, oh, this is because you have been disorganised, Sharri, and as my boss, this is your fault. And whereas you know the backstory, you know that maybe a client's called up last minute, asked for something, therefore it's not your fault at all, and now we have to deliver on something to a deadline, etc. and so on. This is just going to mean so much he said, she said type action for anyone who actually wants to exercise these laws and take them for a ride. It's going to get ridiculous.
Maybe we should have it so it goes both ways. Okay, oh, g'day, boss. Yeah, sorry. Look, I know it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, but I forgot to do all that stuff you asked me. Would you mind just, doing it yourself and getting it back to me on Monday morning? Thanks, mate.
All right, Joe Hildebrand, Liz Storer, thanks so much for joining
Cheers.
me. Now, don't go anywhere. Labor has failed to improve Australia's unemployment problem despite overhauling the jobs program. The Daily Telegraph's James Willis has crunched the numbers and joins me with his exclusive story next. Plus, pro-Palestinian protesters attempt to confront anti-Semitism supporters who were rallying in Melbourne. I've got more on that with the Christian organiser of Nevergrain Is Now after the break. Welcome back. Well, exclusive news story now from the Daily Telegraph. New data has revealed that there are still more than 1 million people receiving either job seeker or youth allowance welfare payments, the same number as when Labor was sworn into government, despite overhauling the jobs program. This is costing taxpayers $16 billion a year. I'm joined now by the Daily Telegraph's James Willis. James, great to see you. So tell us about this story you've just broken over on the Daily Telly.
Thanks for having me on your show, Sharri. I think this figure that you've just quoted is important to clarify so people understand exactly how bad this problem is. We're not talking about people that are on a disability pension, veterans, people that are on an age pension. This is 1 million Aussies who have been declared capable of working at least a little bit, about 500,000 of them for at least 30 hours a week. And yet in 2 years of government, with Tony Burke as the employment minister, Labor has failed to move the dial on this figure, and we still have 1 million Australians on the job seeker and youth allowance program. Now, a lot of these people, I think 200,000-300,000 have been on the program for at least 2 years, if not 5 years, if not 10 years for about 70,000. And we have to start asking, when Labor continues to say we've created hundreds of thousands of jobs, unemployment's at record lows, you've got this massive 1 million elephant in the room, which is people that should be working that aren't, and it starts to shine a pretty big light on the number of migrants that we've brought in over the last 2 years, more than 1 million people who all can't go immediately on unemployment benefits, need to have a job, so that's taken jobs in that regard. But what is Labor doing to fix this problem that Tony Burke said was on the right track in June 2022?
Well, Tony Burke, as you said, the employment minister, what did he have to say for himself today when you asked him about this problem?
Well, it's the same lines that we hear from Labor over and over again. They've created 820,000 jobs, unemployment's at almost record levels, and they've managed to get things moving, and they've had new things in the budget to give incentives to employers to get people into work. But the reality is, in June 2022, Tony Burke said it was a clean slate. He was going to wipe all the penalty points from welfare recipients if they hadn't met their mutual obligations. He was going to get people job ready. And 2 years on, we still have 1 million people out of work completely. I would note as well, Sharri, that there are large numbers of these people on job seeker and youth allowance that are on in Mr Burke's backyard in Watson, in Ed Husick's electorate of Chifley, in Jason Clare's electorate of Blaxland, and also McMahon for Chris Bowen. That's about 30,000 between them. So this is a problem that senior Labor ministers should be deeply concerned by. and yet we have not moved the dial on the number of unemployed Australians. And it's not a cheap problem, as you say, it's a $16 billion problem.
Yeah, massive, 16 billion a year. Now let's have a look at News Poll today. It showed that despite the commitments to cost of living relief, 29% of voters thought they'd be worse off after this new Labor budget. This is compared to 27% who thought they'd be better off. Meantime, 39% thought that the new budget would actually make inflation worse. Now, James, this will be a disappointing result for Albanese and Chalmers. You know, they say this had nothing to do with politics, but of course, you know, it is an economic document, but it's also a political one, and they were certainly hoping that the billions of dollars spent on cost of living relief would put them in good standing ahead of the next election.
Well, it all goes back, Sharri, to the broken promise, one of the greatest broken promises in recent memories that we heard before the last election, that Labor would reduce people's power bills by $275. And they kept saying along the way, oh, no, don't worry, that doesn't start until 2025. Well, we're now at that point where that money should be coming off people's power bills. As we know, whether you're a small business, whether you're a family, energy bills are absolutely crippling people. So a $300 supplement to everyone from the richest Australian down is their way of saying, look, we got this wrong, but here's a little bit of bill relief anyway. As we know, for the majority of people, you'll barely even feel this off your quarterly bill. Bills are going in the wrong direction. This is the biggest story and the most common thing you hear from small businesses right across Australia. Their energy bills are through the roof. They can't pay their gas. Gas is a massive issue that hasn't even been looked at properly in this budget. Labor's taken that off the agenda because they've, had to do deals with Greens and the independents to keep things going. And it's the cost of inflation. It's the cost of wages. Small businesses are going broke. We've had some of the best restaurants in Sydney that have gone broke over the last few weeks and can't remain open because they simply cannot afford the costs of doing business. It's terrible. It's probably... in fairness to Labor, there's a fair sting in the tail from the coronavirus, as we know, but the Prime Minister's the one in power, and ultimately when voters go to the polls, he's going to be the one that they judge when they decide whether he can get another term or not.
Well, they might not have blamed him, but he promised that he'd be able to make life more affordable. It was one of his key election pledges ahead of the 2022 election. Daily Telegraph, thanks for joining us live from the Telegraph newsroom. Now, there were ugly scenes on the streets of Melbourne yesterday after pro-Palestinian protesters tried to clash with those simply demanding an end to anti-Semitism. They weren't supporting Israel openly, they were just demanding an end to anti-Semitism. Now, police arrested 6 people in the ensuing chaos. The peaceful crowd attended the Never Again Is Now rally. It was organised by my next guest, Pastor Mark Leach, and he joins me here in studio. Mark, thank you very much for your time. Now, firstly, congratulations on organising these rallies as a Christian pastor fighting anti-Semitism. It is so important to have non-Jews leading the charge. So, as a Jew, I thank you for that. Now tell me what happened, because, we saw all of this unfold on the news yesterday, and it was really worrying.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on your show. And look, yesterday was an amazing day in Melbourne. It was, in some ways, the best of days, and in other ways, the worst of days. The best of days because, in spite of Melbourne's lovely weather, 14 degrees, rain, showers, the security threat around us, 7,000 of us gathered on the steps of Parliament.
Huge.
Huge, to come and say to our country that there is no place here for hate. We were led by Christians, we had worship music, we had Jewish music, we had a big Indigenous presence on the stage, we had political leaders, religious leaders, Persian speakers, Indian speakers. It was a wonderful celebration of all that is best about our multicultural, cohesive society. It was just fantastic. That was the best. The worst was there were probably, it looks like there are going to be more reported incidents of anti-Semitism on that day than on any other single day in Australia's recorded history. There were mobs of left-leaning and jihadists supporting Islamic supporters baying for vengeance all around us. The city was full of these people, and as our people tried to come peacefully, Christians, like one lady, 72-year-old Presbyterian of all people, and her husband trying to get to our rally, she was kicked in the calf, she was pushed, she was spat on, she was called a baby killer and a Nazi. So that was...
How is she doing? Is she okay?
She's okay. She's resilient. She stayed for the whole rally and found it an incredibly uplifting experience. But it just showed these people believe that any form of resistance is justified because their cause is so valid, I guess. But it does seem like their cause really is...
The psychology is difficult to understand, though, when they were trying to disrupt a protest that was just calling for the end of anti-Semitism. It's inexplicable. So now the police tried to have these two rallies in separate locations.
Correct.
So how did this confrontation eventuate?
Well, we started negotiating with the police probably 2 months ago because we wanted to come into the city centre to support the Jewish community. Now, the Jewish community can't come in on a Saturday. The Christians can't come in on a Sunday morning because they're in church. So Sunday afternoon was the time. And the police negotiated with the pro-Palestinian side, and they were going to stay on the State Library. They've been in the city of Melbourne every Sunday for 34 weeks. So it just seemed pretty reasonable for the first time since October 7 for the Christians and Jews to get together on the steps of Parliament House. They'd agreed to that. The police had deployed 600 officers, including the riot squad and the horse unit.
That's a massive, waste in a sense of resources in itself, isn't it?
Well, I'm glad I'm a New South Wales taxpayer, not a Victorian taxpayer, because they are footing the bill to maintain public order in the face of sustained hatred and vitriol and violence every week. 600 officers, mounted police for, say, 8 hours. Do the math on that. That's what the Victorian taxpayers footed the bill for.
So they were there. They were meant to be separate locations, and then what happened?
As the afternoon progressed, they started the pro-Palestinians started at State Library, and then against what they'd assured the police would be the case, they marched up to our rally and tried to break through police lines to attack what we were doing. It was an extraordinary display. I think what it did was just show that, they just hate love and inclusion and peace, because that's what we were protesting. We were there to say we stand for love and for inclusion. We weren't taking a view on events in the Middle East.
No.
So anyone who protests love, well, what are they standing for?
Well, yeah, exactly. How can you possibly oppose that? Now, let's turn to Melbourne University. And we know that finally the chancellors, the leadership there have said that if the protesters don't leave the encampment, they are going to call police. I mean, this has been many, many days now.
Yeah.
Do you think they should remove these encampments? I mean, people like Mark Scott say, oh, well, there's free speech. Yeah. And yes, there's free speech, but you're not allowed to just camp at any university campus we don't have campers setting up tents on university campuses. So why should this be any different?
Well, I don't think it should be. And the problem is not just the encampments, but what they're trying to do is intimidate and shut down anyone else's right to free association and free speech. So there are lots of reports of Jewish students who are scared to go on campus, who are intimidated, who are abused. And these encampments should have been closed down within the first hour that they started. I mean, the best time to pull out a weed is before it takes over your whole garden. And this is just an infestation of hatred on our places of higher learning that make it unsafe for our Jewish students and our Christian students who oppose this kind of hatred to go about their business and study in peace.
Yeah, there's been a lot of abuse and harassment. Mark Leach, I have to thank you again for your leadership on this issue. You were there on October 9 at the very first protest. You were chased by aggressive protesters and you haven't backed down since. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Now, plenty more to come. Politicians and staffers put on notice with the threat of jail time if they don't report complaints of assault, discrimination or bullying. More on that shortly. Andrew Carswell and Cameron Milner will be here live next. Plus, the latest from Iran on the helicopter crash that killed President Ebrahim Raisi, known as the Butcher of Tehran. Welcome back. Well, politicians and staffers have been put on notice. Report sexual harassment, assault, discrimination or bullying, or face a potential $3 million fine. The Age has reported that this much delayed and heavily disputed Parliamentary Standards Commission could even jail a politician or staffer for 15 years for failing to report allegations. Meanwhile, former PM Scott Morrison says he did everything he possibly could for women while he was in the top job. Yet he says the issue was weaponised against him for partisan political purposes. Have a listen.
Our government, and me in particular, were the target of what was a very, I think, disappointing campaign. This wasn't an issue that should have been used for politics. And sadly, I think it was, as the recent court cases found.
All right, and he was, of course, there referring to Brittany Higgins when he said the recent court case. Let's bring in tonight's political panel. Former media advisor to Scott Morrison, Andrew Carswell, and former Chief of Staff to Bill Shorten, Cameron Milner. Great to see you both. Andrew Carswell, well, let's start with you. Scott Morrison there's doing a round of interviews to promote his new book. He made that claim that the issue was weaponised against him, the women issue, the claims that he had a problem with women, and this did become a political liability for him. What did you think? How did you handle this? You were in his office at the time.
Well, I think Sharri, Scott was used as a lightning rod in this moment too, and his enemies seized upon this, whether it be a Me Too movement or women raising other issues in society. His detractors jumped on him in that very moment to paint him to be somewhat either against women or not understanding of their needs, and I think that certainly stuck with him throughout the rest of his prime ministership quite unfairly. I mean, he's very open and honest about some of the slip-ups that he made in some of those forums. But by and large, his record is pretty significant in what his government and the Turnbull government as well did for Australian women, whether that be from funding for endometriosis, whether it be for domestic violence funding, mental health, various measures that were done. So his policy outcomes far outweighed some of those small slip-ups that his enemies used against him at will.
Mm. Well, in the recent court case, Justice Michael Lee did find that while Brittany Higgins was raped, there was no political cover-up in the Morrison government relating to her rape, and he made this very clear. Cameron Milner, do you think there should be an apology to Scott Morrison from some of the Labor ministers who really targeted him, claiming that he covered up the rape? A judge has now found that this never happened.
Well, I say two things. The first is Scott Morrison was a politician and he gave as good as he got. So he sledged people, he made names, he called things out. So boo-hoo. Sorry, Scott, you're in politics, mate, and you were heading up the show. But I will say this. The three Labor mean girls did weaponise the rape. There was no political conspiracy. Justice Lee has gone through extensively to say there was no political conspiracy. So there is absolutely no justification for taking a young woman and politicising and weaponising her in a desperate attempt to win the political points, to score points against Scott Morrison on such a personal and potentially criminal matter, which at least at civil level has been proved to be a rape. So those mean girls, Katie Gallagher, Penny Wong, are still there. They bullied colleagues, they went after this issue, and they're the ones who should be investigated if this is the new standard to which Parliament's going to have to meet.
Well, we now know just how close the Prime Minister is to Penny Wong. In some areas, she's basically running the show, so we can understand why at the time he so heavily resisted calling any investigation into the allegations of bullying. A story, by the way, that I broke. Just got to put that in there.
True.
Now, Andrew Carswell, we've seen that after the recent budget, we still think, the polls are showing that people are still feeling like they're going to be financially worse off, despite the $300 in energy bill relief, despite the stage 3 tax cuts taking effect on July 1. Do you think this budget is going to work against Labor? I mean, they're hoping it will be at least the platform ahead of the next election.
Oh, I think Australians are already starting to see through this budget. They're smart. They know what's going on. They know when a government is trying to buy them off or win them over. Yes, they'll take the goodies that come out of a budget. They'll take the bribe, but they won't say thanks and they won't give you any credit for it because they can see what you're trying to do. And this is a budget that is trying to win them over 12 months out from an election. So the public is cynical about this. But we're already facing the fact that this budget has gone down the toilet. We're what, 5-6 days after the budget. We're not talking about the measures. We're talking about how badly it's performed. And we're talking about Peter Dutton's budget in reply speech where he's talking about migration and housing and the link and getting that right. And that is the message that is resonating with the public because people are feeling that. It's tapping into this kind of inherent fear that Australians have of either getting their kids into homes or addressing the housing crisis in this country by bringing down migration. So I think it's really tapped into something. The budget is yesterday's news already.
Well, you know, Cameron, Jim Chalmers, who I know you admire greatly, thinks he's found a very clever way here to give cost of living relief to people and give that relief and use that spending, in effect, to bring down inflation. And, you know, his argument, and we've heard him prosecute this argument in many media interviews, his argument is that by bringing down the CPI component that is energy bills, that lowers inflation and at the same time you're putting money in people's pockets. He says he's not sending a cheque out, he's giving the money to the energy companies. You know, a lot of journalists and economists are questioning this logic. What do you make of it?
Well, I admire Jim Chalmers' loyalty to the Prime Minister, who is desperately struggling to walk around with a fistful of 50s and try to buy himself some love from the Australian electorate. This budget was an election budget. This was a budget to try to fix Albo's appalling numbers. And it's not just Newspoll, Resolve, Freshwater, our own GXO poll. All this polling should be alarm bells for Albanese because he's desperately disliked, not trusted by the electorate. He's made cost of living the central issue and has failed on it. And poor old Jim has to, you know, put out a budget which quite reasonably hasn't lasted less than a week with the economists. And it's because of Jim's loyalty to Albo to try to give him an electoral platform because Albo is stalling every other possible way in this polling.
Yeah. Look, you both are seasoned political operatives. You know, there's a lot of speculation about election timing. I have it on extremely good authority that there are no plans for an election this year, that Albanese is planning on going, you know, the full term to next year. Andrew Carswell, you know, would it make sense at all for him to try hold one later this year?
I think, Sharri, you always want that option. And I think what Jim has put forward in his numbers just open the door to a possible December election, an early December election. It's not their intent and wouldn't be their first choice to do that. They'll want to go to a full term. They'll want to deliver a mini budget in March and then go to an election in May. But you always go when the numbers say to go. And if the numbers are good in December, if the economy is recovering, if inflation is coming down and there's a prospect of an interest rate decrease, then they'll be wanting to keep that option open.
What do you think, Cameron? I mean, the PM is probably going to want to stay in the job until he can fly in those new $450 million jets that he's ordered.
That's right. Toto 2.0 is on the tarmac for Albo. No, look, for a guy who said that, you know, cost of living was a central issue and didn't do anything about it, the guy who promised $275 power cut and didn't deliver it, why would the Australian electorate believe him that he's going to go full term? This budget was all about buying a vote, and that's what it looks like, and that's what it is, and that only has a certain lifetime. So I think this budget has a half-life of about 6 months and is desperately designed to give them an option before Christmas to go, before potentially things get much worse for Australians.
Andrew, any chance the coalition could win? I mean, they need to win 19 seats, the coalition. They need to win 19 seats to be in majority government. Is that too big an ask?
Well, history's certainly against them. There's only been one first-term government that has failed to win a second term, and that was way back in 1931. So it is against them. They're a long way behind. What we're more likely to see is a very unholy, ungodly, unruly minority government of all sorts of colours, green, teal and others. That is the most likely outcome. A Labor majority would be probably second running in that order, and then a coalition government. So the task is ahead of them. They are proving themselves to be a formidable rival, a formidable alternative government. I think Peter Dutton has surprised many, and he's caught them napping a little bit, and he'll be a formidable opponent in any election campaign upcoming.
I thought Simon Benson's analysis, he's the political editor for The Australian, he wrote a piece last week where he said that, the advisors around Peter Dutton had been trying to soften his image, but it actually turns out that his tough image suits the times when people are worried about national security with, the detainee scandal. They're worried about the social cohesion on our streets and worried about cost of living. What do you reckon, Cameron?
Well, I think Peter Dutton's secret weapon is Anthony Albanese. If this is a referendum on Albanese, and this may well be the case come the next federal election, Labor's got real problems. This is a leader who has gone backwards since the last election, whose primary is falling, whose best opportunity, as Andrew quite reasonably says, is this cavalcade of weird teals and greens propping up an Albanese prime ministership. Disaster. So Labor's got real problems coming into the next federal election. As I say, Peter Dutton's best friend is Anthony Albanese.
As they say, governments lose elections often, oppositions don't win them. Andrew Carswell, Cameron Milner, great to see you as always on a Monday. Now, still to come, the death of Iran's president and what it means for the conflict in the Middle East. Kosha Garda will join me next. Well, let's turn to Iran, where it's been confirmed that President Ebrahim Raisi and his foreign minister have been killed in a helicopter crash. Mr. Raisi and Hossein, I'm not even going to attempt this last name, were flying in heavy fog when the helicopter suffered a hard landing into a mountain peak. State television is reporting that there have been no signs of life at the crash site. And I'm joined now by Sky News contributor Kosha Garda. Kosha, there's a lot of speculation about what this means for the conflict in the Middle East. The president isn't the most powerful figure in Iran. That's the Ayatollah. So do you think his death could mean any change in strategy?
I think that is the question. Given that the Ayatollah is the supreme leader and really controls most of the political power in that country, it would appear that this isn't really going to be that consequential, certainly not in the immediate term. On paper, the president really is more of a ceremonial role and doesn't have that much authority. Behind the scenes, of course, there might be different ones who express divergent opinions and things happen behind closed doors to some extent. But reportedly, President Raisi was not one of those. And he was somebody who was very much in the image of the Ayatollah, very much in agreement with him on all policy positions. And so it would appear that the replacement is likely going to be somebody similar, since the Ayatollah is still around. He's 85 years old, and while there will be elections that have to take place, he is most likely expected to appoint or select the next person in those elections who's likely to win and is going to be a replacement, and we won't see much change, I don't think, in policy positions.
Yeah, it's not considered truly democratic elections, far from it. Now, is there the possibility that there was anything suspicious in this crash, or is it simply a case of bad weather and ageing equipment?
It's impossible to know that, and we can only speculate. What we do know is that it was bad weather. This is very tough terrain close to the border with Azerbaijan. Even the search and rescue and recovery mission has been very difficult and very challenging to execute, which suggests that it's certainly possible that it was accidental. But what we also know is whenever there is opportunity and motive for something suspicious to happen to these world leaders, that's human nature, and it's natural and appropriate even to harbor some suspicion that there might be more to the story. We'll never know, of course. And there are lots of actors who have motive to have something like this happen, both domestically. He's very unpopular with dissidents and people who want the reform movement in Iran, as well as right now globally, given the conflict in that region and all the movements that are happening on the geopolitical stage. It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that there's more to it.
Now, the president is often referred to as the Butcher of Tehran. Can you tell us how he got this title?
Yes, the history is that in 1988, he was one of 4 or 5 judges that presided over mass capital punishment executions of political prisoners and political dissidents. I think the U.S. Treasury Department, during sanctions that they imposed on Iran back in 2019, even said that these were extrajudicial, where they went sort of outside the laws on the books in Iran and executed thousands or even tens of thousands of political dissidents, and that's where that name comes from.
Yeah, all right. Kosha Garda, thank you so much for explaining that to us tonight. Now, thanks everyone for your company this evening. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. If you want to rewatch or if you missed the breaking story at the start of the program about the scandal at Channel 9, head to the website. Here's Paul Murray.